The storm had been building all evening, low thunder rolling across the city like distant artillery. By the time Anna untied her apron and slipped out the back door of the diner, the skies finally opened. Rain came down in sheets, turning the alley behind the Maple Street diner into a mirror of broken neon and shimmering puddles. Jonathan Hale sat in the back of his chauffeured car watching. Normally at this hour, he would nod to his driver, sink into the leather seat, and vanish into the sterile silence of his penthouse. But tonight, he opened the door himself. "Stay here," he told the driver, his voice sharper than usual. "Engine off. Don't follow." The man gave a brief nod. He'd learned long ago not to question Jonathan's oddities. Pulling up the collar of his $1,000 coat, Jonathan stepped into the storm. The rain was cold, the kind of cold that seeped through fabric and bone, but he barely felt it. His eyes were fixed on Anna. She moved quickly, head down, shoulders hunched against the weather. She should have turned toward the bus stop on Main Avenue. Instead, she veered into the shadows. That's when Jonathan saw it. Behind the dumpster, hidden from the street, she retrieved 2 duffel bags. Large, heavy, the zippers strained to hold their contents. She lifted them with practiced effort, hooking one on each shoulder. They weren't gym bags. They looked weighted, stuffed, full of something important. Jonathan's heart kicked hard against his ribs. To him, it looked like the start of every bad headline he'd ever read: drugs, contraband, crime. His mind, trained to see motives in everything, whispered the worst. For a moment, he nearly turned back. But then the same restless curiosity that had dragged him to this diner night after night pressed him forward. He followed. Anna's pace was relentless, her small frame bent beneath the weight of the bags. She didn't take main roads. She slipped into side streets and alleys, places where the city's glow didn't reach. The streetlights here were shattered or burned out, leaving the pavement drowned in shadow. Boarded-up storefronts leaned against one another like tired drunks. Graffiti screamed from the walls. Jonathan's polished shoes splashed through puddles of rain and oil, each step sounding far too loud. His coat clung heavy against him, useless in the downpour. For the first time in years, he felt out of place, exposed. Halfway down a narrow street, a burst of laughter cut through the rain. Jonathan froze. Ahead, a small pack of teenagers huddled beneath a broken awning. Their hoodies were pulled tight, cigarettes glowing between their fingers. They noticed movement. One of them squinted into the darkness. Jonathan's chest clenched. If they recognized him, if they decided he was an easy mark, an older man in a tailored coat with no protection, he was finished. He pressed himself into the recessed doorway of a shuttered pawn shop, the smell of rust and mildew sharp in his nose. The teens muttered, one of them stepping closer, eyes narrowing. For a breathless second, Jonathan thought his heart might stop. Then a car rolled past at the end of the block, headlights slicing the rain, distracting them. The boys turned away, their laughter fading into the storm. Jonathan exhaled, shaky and slow. He realized his hands were trembling. This was danger, real danger, the kind no security system or private jet could insulate him from. When he looked up again, Anna was nearly gone. He hurried forward, splashing down the alley, following the faint outline of her figure. She turned onto a cul-de-sac. Haven Lane. It was worse here. Apartment buildings slumped against one another, their brick facades crumbling, windows dark, except for the blue flicker of an old television or two. The street ended at a tall graffiti-stained wall. At the far corner stood the most broken of them all, a squat 4-story building with a crooked front door. Anna didn't hesitate. She slipped through a side entrance propped open with a brick and descended into a dark basement stairwell, her duffel bag still heavy on her shoulders. Jonathan stopped in the rain, staring at the building. 42. Haven Lane. A chill, far colder than the storm, ran through him. Whatever secret Ana Rivera carried it was hidden down there in the shadows of that forgotten basement. And Jonathan Hale was about to find out. A man with more money than most nations spent 37 nights in the same greasy diner, staring at the same tired waitress. Why? What secret was she hiding that even $10 billion couldn't buy? His name was Jonathan Hale, and in boardrooms across the country, his word could shift markets and send shockwaves through entire industries. He was a man who could calculate risk, down to the decimal predict consumer behavior with chilling accuracy, and turn every hour of his life into profit. Time for Jonathan was more precious than gold, and yet here he was, squandering 2 of those hours every single night, sitting in the corner booth of the Maple Street diner, nursing the same bitter cup of coffee. The diner itself was a relic, a stubborn leftover from the 1950s that had somehow survived into the age of glass towers and touchscreen menus. The vinyl seats were cracked and patched with duct tape. The checkerboard floor was scuffed with decades of footsteps. The neon sign out front buzzed and flickered in the rain like a tired sentinel. The air smelled of fried onions, burnt coffee, and the faint ghost of cigarettes long since banned. To most, it was a place to be endured. But for Jonathan, it had become something else. A window into a world untouched by algorithms and quarterly earnings. And at the heart of that world was Ana Rivera. She was in her late 30s, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that could never quite contain the loose strands falling around her face. Her eyes warm brown, shadowed with fatigue, still managed to soften when she smiled. She carried herself with the economy of someone who had been on her feet for years, but her weariness was never an excuse for unkindness. Jonathan watched her move between tables with quiet grace, as if she had memorized not just the orders, but the souls of the people she served. To the drunk at the counter, she spoke gently but firmly, keeping him calm without humiliating him. To the long-haul trucker, she offered an extra cup of coffee on the house, telling him it looked like he had a long road ahead. And to the lonely veteran in the back booth, she really listened to stories he had probably told 100 times, nodding as if each word mattered. Jonathan Hale, the man who had built an empire on cold data and hard logic, couldn't quantify her. In his world, kindness was a transaction, a networking tool. But with Ana, it was something else entirely. Something he didn't understand. It wasn't desire that kept him there, night after night. It was fascination, a gnawing curiosity about how someone so exhausted could still radiate such quiet strength. She seemed ordinary, and yet there was something hidden beneath the surface, something he couldn't name. And then, on the 37th night, he saw it. A family left a $20 tip on a $10 check. Ana picked it up and froze. For a long moment, she didn't smile. She didn't tuck it away. Instead, she stared at the bill with an expression Jonathan had seen countless times before, just not in diners. It was the same look he'd seen in CEOs weighing a life-or-death merger or traders deciding whether to pull the trigger on a billion-dollar deal. Her lips pressed together. Her eyes flickered with calculation, not gratitude. This wasn't joy. This was survival. Jonathan felt a chill crawl up his spine. For the first time in years, the master of numbers realized he was staring at a puzzle he couldn't solve, and the suspicion that rose in his chest would change his life forever. Jonathan crossed the deserted street, the rain soaking through his coat and plastering his hair against his forehead. He stopped in front of the crooked building, his breath misting in the cold night air. A faint light flickered from a basement window, its glass smeared with grime and reinforced with iron bars. He crouched low, his knees pressing into the wet pavement, and peered inside. At first, his mind clung to the story it had already written: a drug den, a meeting place for desperate trades, a hidden economy of shadows. But what he saw through that narrow slice of glass knocked the wind from his chest. The basement wasn't a den of crime. It was a sanctuary. The concrete floor had been scrubbed clean, patched with old rugs to ward off the chill. Shelves lined the walls not with contraband, but with canned food diapers, baby formula boxes of pasta. Against another wall sat bins of winter coats, children's shoes, and wool blankets folded neatly, despite the damp. And there in the center of it all was Ana Rivera. The exhaustion that clung to her at the diner seemed to dissolve here. She moved with a quiet energy, her shoulders no longer bent by fatigue, but lifted with purpose. She unpacked one duffel bag, revealing fresh bread and cartons of milk. From the other, she drew blankets still warm from being tucked against her body during the walk. Jonathan's throat tightened. The first person he noticed was a young mother. Her clothes clung wet against her skin, and she cradled a toddler with fever-glossed eyes. Ana knelt beside her, her voice low and steady, her hand resting gently on the woman's shoulder. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw their effect. The mother's rigid posture softened her fear, momentarily eased. Ana handed her a bag of groceries, a small bottle of children's medicine, and finally wrapped the toddler in a thick wool blanket. Next, an elderly man shuffled forward. His sweater was so thin, Jonathan wondered how it clung together at all. He clutched a single can of soup in his hands, as if it were gold. Ana returned with a steaming mug of tea, setting it gently in front of him before sitting down to listen. Truly listen. Her head tilted as the old man's cracked voice spilled memories into the air. Near the door, a veteran sat, hunched his hands, trembling with cold. Ana placed a heavy coat around his shoulders, then pressed his hands between hers, warming them as though she could transfer her own strength into his bones. Jonathan pressed his forehead to the glass, rain dripping down his cheeks, indistinguishable from the sting in his eyes. Shame coursed through him, hot and bitter. He had followed her expecting darkness. He had suspected greed, crime, something sordid. He had painted her with the colors of his own world, a world where every action was profit-driven, where kindness was a performance. And he had been spectacularly, humiliatingly wrong. Ana wasn't hiding a crime. She was hiding a miracle. At the far end of the room, Jonathan noticed a crude wooden board nailed to the wall. In uneven, hand-painted letters it read, "The Sparrow's Haven." Beneath it, a verse from Scripture, "Not one of them is forgotten before God." Jonathan's hand trembled against the cold metal bars. The name struck him. It was humble, protective, resilient, everything his world of towering skyscrapers and cold contracts was not. He stayed there for nearly an hour, watching the quiet rhythm of survival and grace unfold. A family arrived, their faces etched with eviction notices and hunger. A man with worn-out boots left carrying a new pair, his dignity intact. Each person was known to Ana. She asked about their children, their health, their hopes. Not as a social worker, not as a benefactor, but as a neighbor. This was not charity in the way he understood it. It was community. Jonathan Hale, the billionaire genius, the master of data and dominance, felt something shift deep within him. For years he had believed his power was measured in assets, in towers of steel and glass, in contracts and capital. But staring into that basement, he realized none of it could buy what Ana carried in those duffel bags. Compassion, defiance, hope. The rain pattered harder on the glass, but Jonathan didn't move. His breath fogged the window as he whispered the only truth his fractured heart could form. "She's not a waitress," he murmured, voice cracking. "She's a warrior." Jonathan Hale spent the next day in a fog. The stock tickers, the endless calls, the contracts sliding across his desk, they all blurred together. For years, these numbers had been his battlefield, his proof of dominance. Now they felt meaningless. What wasn't meaningless was the look in Ana Rivera's eyes when she had shoved his money back at him. Her words echoed like a hammer inside his skull. "Money destroyed us once. I won't let it poison this place." By mid-afternoon, he stormed into the office of his longtime chief financial officer, Daniel Cho. Daniel had been with him since the beginning, back when they were still running operations out of a cramped loft with second-hand furniture. If there was anyone Jonathan trusted with the truth, it was him. "I need you to dig into something," Jonathan said, shutting the door behind him. His voice was low, urgent. "Off the books. Personal." Daniel arched an eyebrow. "What kind of something?" "There's a developer. A name keeps coming up, Richard Thorne." Jonathan began pacing the length of the office, agitation in every stride. "He's pushing families out on Haven Lane, tripling rent, forcing evictions. I want to know everything. Who he is, who he works with, and most importantly, who funds him." Daniel scribbled a note on a legal pad, his expression calm but curious. "Give me a few hours. I'll have a report for you." Jonathan nodded once and walked out. But inside, unease gnawed at him. A man like Richard Thorne didn't operate alone. Predators like him always had backing wealthy investors, hiding in the shadows, content to profit from misery without getting their hands dirty. By nightfall, Daniel appeared at Jonathan's penthouse, a tablet in his hand and a gravity in his eyes. Jonathan gestured him in. "You're not going to like what I found," Daniel said quietly. On the screen glowed the corporate logo of Thorne Development Group, a sleek, skyscraper-shaped T, polished to sterile perfection. Beneath it, CEO Richard Thorne. Jonathan scrolled, his jaw tightening as the file unfolded. Thorne was exactly the type he despised, second-generation wealth, ruthless to the core, calling himself a visionary, while he bulldozed communities for glass condos and overpriced office towers. He had lawsuits stacked like poker chips, tenant harassment, predatory buyouts, zoning violations. Somehow, he always slithered free. "He's a vulture," Jonathan muttered. Daniel's face was grave. "He's a very successful vulture, and well-funded." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "By who?" Daniel tapped the screen, pulling up a flow chart of shell corporations, capital funds, and subsidiaries. It was a labyrinth of arrows and boxes, the kind of structure designed to hide the truth in plain sight. Jonathan leaned in, scanning the chart. His breath caught. Near the top sat a familiar box, Hale Capital Ventures Real Estate Portfolio 9. A neat arrow traced downward through two intermediary funds until it landed squarely on Thorne Development Group. The room tilted. For a moment, Jonathan couldn't breathe. "What is this?" His voice came out a hoarse whisper. Daniel's reply was steady, almost apologetic. "It's us. Through a private equity arm we acquired 3 years ago. We've invested $90 million into Richard Thorne's flagship project, the Haven Lane redevelopment." The tablet slipped from Jonathan's hands and clattered onto the marble floor. He staggered back, bracing himself against the glass wall of the penthouse. Outside, the city glittered like a constellation of indifferent stars. But now all Jonathan could see in those lights were eviction notices, boarded windows, children clutching their mothers' hands in fear. It wasn't some faceless firm that had destroyed Anna's family. It was him. Her fury, her mistrust, it had been justified. Every rent hike, every sleepless night in Haven Lane, every desperate face in that basement. They were all stamped with his name, his money, his empire. For years, Jonathan Hale had believed he was building a monument to progress. But in truth, he had become the very predator she loathed. Shame coursed through him, hot and choking. But as it settled, something colder rose from its ashes resolve. He straightened fists, clenching at his sides. His voice was low, steady, deadly certain. "If I built this monster," Jonathan said, his reflection staring back at him from the glass, "then I'll be the one to tear it down." The boardroom sat high above the city, a glass box with a view that stretched for miles. The table was polished obsidian, gleaming beneath recessed lights, a perfect stage for power. At its head lounged Richard Thorne, silver at his temples, a shark's smile fixed to his face. He looked like a man who had never lost a fight he picked. Jonathan Hale walked in without fanfare. No entourage, no lawyers at his side. Just a dark suit, no tie, and eyes that burned with something Thorne couldn't quite read. "Hail," Thorne said smoothly, rising to shake his hand. "An unexpected honor. I thought I'd be meeting with one of your fund managers. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Jonathan ignored the hand, sliding into a chair across from him. "We need to talk about Haven Lane." Thorne's smile widened, confident. "Ah, yes. Project Phoenix. A rough neighborhood, but ripe for rebirth. Once the last few tenants are cleared out, we'll break ground. Condos retail the works. You'll like the returns, hail spectacular margins." Jonathan's gaze was steady, unblinking. "You mean evictions? Families shoved out onto the street?" Thorne chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. "Let's not dress it up in sentiment. This is how progress works. You didn't build your empire worrying about people who couldn't keep up. We're in the business of creating value. Those tenants forgotten in a month." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Thorne leaned back, smug, certain. Then Jonathan spoke. "You're right about one thing," he said evenly. "I didn't worry about the cost before, but now I do. Effective immediately, Hale Capital is pulling every cent from your project." Thorne blinked and then laughed. A sharp barking sound. "You can't. We have contracts, penalty clauses. You'd be on the hook for $87 million. No sane businessman would burn that kind of money." Jonathan leaned forward, his voice cold enough to frost glass. "I've already authorized the payment. Consider it tuition for a very expensive lesson." The color drained from Thorne's face. He sat forward now, his smile faltering. "You're bluffing." Jonathan's stare never wavered. "This isn't a bluff. While we're at it, my legal team has spent the last 48 hours dissecting your empire. We've uncovered a neat pattern of zoning violations, code abuses, and tenant harassment cases you thought were buried. I've already passed it to the press. The Times found it very compelling." Thorne's jaw tightened. The predator's mask was slipping, panic bleeding through the cracks. Jonathan wasn't finished. "And as primary investor, my company holds a project integrity clause. Section 11B. You thought it was boilerplate? It allows me to assume control of assets in cases of reputational damage. I'd say a front-page expose on your slumlord tactics qualifies." He slid a document across the table. "Effective immediately, the Haven Lane properties are seized." Thorne's hand trembled as he snatched the paper. His voice cracked. "You're taking the buildings." Jonathan rose slowly, his shadow stretching across the table. "No," he said, his voice like iron. "I'm giving them back." Outside the room, his orders were already in motion. The ownership of 42 Haven Lane and the surrounding blocks would be transferred to a non-profit housing trust managed by the residents themselves. Their rents would be frozen at affordable rates. The eviction notices that had haunted their doors would be torn to shreds. Back in the boardroom, Richard Thorne sat crumpled in his leather chair, the king stripped of his crown. His empire, once built on fear, was collapsing under the weight of justice. Jonathan paused at the doorway, turning one last time. His eyes met Thorne's, no anger, no gloating, just cold resolve. "You preyed on the vulnerable," he said quietly. "And you made the mistake of doing it with my money. That ends today." He left Thorne staring at the ruin of his empire, at the obsidian table suddenly too big, too empty. As Jonathan stepped into the elevator, he didn't feel triumph in the old sense. No thrill of a deal closed, no satisfaction of profit gained. This was different. This was release. For the first time in years, Jonathan Hale wasn't just making money. He was making things right. The news did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like sunlight. On Haven Lane, families who had been bracing for eviction awoke to find new letters taped to their doors. Not threats, not notices. Relief. The rent hikes were reversed. The lawsuits dropped. The buildings had been purchased by a mysterious benefactor and placed into a community trust that guaranteed affordable housing for years to come. At first, disbelief hung heavy in the air. Mothers clutched the papers, their lips trembling. Fathers read them twice then, a third time, as if waiting for the cruel punchline. And when no punchline came, relief spread like a rising tide. Children ran through hallways that had once echoed with fear, laughing again. Neighbors embraced in doorways, tears streaming freely. For the first time in months, the street knew the sound of joy. In the basement of 42 Haven Lane, the Sparrows' Haven was alive with voices. People came not just for food, but to celebrate, to breathe, to believe. And then the basement door opened, and in walked Jonathan Hale. He wasn't wearing the sharp suit or polished shoes of the billionaire. He wore jeans, a dark sweater rain still clinging to his shoulders. For a moment, the room went still. And then Ana Rivera's eyes found his. Her breath caught. "It was you." Jonathan nodded, quiet. "I couldn't just write a check. You taught me that. Some problems can't be bought off. They have to be fought." He didn't stand like a savior. He didn't speak like a conqueror. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. He placed it on the nearest table and slid it toward her. Inside were not bills, not blank checks, but pages of legal documents. "This," he said, "is the charter for the Sparrows' Haven Foundation. It's a registered nonprofit now with tax-exempt status and legal protections. There's a board of directors. Mr. Alvarez has agreed to chair if you'll have him. The mission statement is yours. I took it from the words on your wall. This place won't just survive, Ana. It will endure." Anna's fingers trembled as she opened the folder. She saw bank accounts, legal safeguard structure. But more than that, she saw freedom. The freedom to focus on people, not paperwork. To build, not just patch. Her eyes lifted, shimmering. "Why are you doing this?" Jonathan looked around the room. The shelves of canned food, the threadbare rugs, the faces of people who had been forgotten, until she reminded them they mattered. "For 37 nights, he said softly, I sat in that diner watching you. I thought the light in people had gone out. But you carried it even when you had nothing left to give. I thought wealth and power were the goal. You showed me they're just tools. Their only real value is in how you use them to protect the light in others." A silence fell heavy and holy. Ana closed the folder, pressing her hand against it, as though grounding herself in the reality of what he'd done. "I don't want to be your benefactor," Jonathan continued. "I want to be your partner. Let me help not with money alone, but with my time, my experience. Let me learn from you how to build something that truly matters." Her lips parted, the sharp defiance of old replaced by something softer. For the first time, she didn't refuse what he offered. "Okay," she whispered. Then stronger, "Okay, Jonathan, let's get to work." 3 months later, the Sparrows' Haven had outgrown the damp basement. Its new home was a converted warehouse 2 blocks away. Light spilling through tall windows, shelves stocked with food, a play corner for children, a clinic for legal aid. Jonathan's systems made it efficient. Anna's heart made it human. And one evening in the Maple Street diner, the roles reversed. The regulars nearly dropped their forks when Jonathan Hale, billionaire titan of industry, stood behind the counter pouring coffee into chipped mugs. He wasn't there to be seen. He wasn't there for applause. He was there because service had changed him. Ana leaned against the counter, watching him with a small, knowing smile. For once, he was the one serving. Jonathan glanced around the diner at faces no longer hardened by fear, but softened with hope. And in that moment, he felt something he had never felt in his sterile penthouse or gleaming boardroom. Wealth. Not the kind measured in billions, but the kind measured in community, in compassion and light that refuses to be extinguished. True wealth is not found in vaults or portfolios. It's found in the courage to act in the kindness that holds others up, in the simple truth that every person matters. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments below. Share it with someone who needs hope tonight. And don't forget to subscribe, because here there are more stories of compassion and courage waiting for you. The following night, Jonathan Hale returned to the Maple Street Diner. The storm had passed, but a different kind of weight hung in the air. He sat in his usual booth, ordered the same bitter coffee, and waited. Anna moved through the diner, as always, refilling cups, balancing plates, offering tired smiles that somehow carried warmth. When she finally placed his check on the table, Jonathan slid a folded stack of bills beneath it, 5 crisp $100 notes. "Thank you," he said simply. Anna glanced down, paused, then lifted the check. She stared at the bills for only a moment before peeling one from the pile and tucking it into her apron pocket. The rest she set gently back on the table. "The coffee's $3, she said softly. "This is more than generous." Her tone was polite but firm, unyielding. Then she turned and walked away before he could respond. Jonathan sat frozen. He had just tipped more than her weekly paycheck, and she'd returned it without hesitation. Not with awe, not with gratitude, but with a quiet dignity that unsettled him more than any hostile takeover ever had. Money had always been his weapon, his solution. But here it had failed. 2 nights later, he decided on a different approach. He drove himself something he hadn't done in years to 42 Haven Lane. The streets were slick, the air sharp with the smell of damp brick and mildew. Anna appeared just as before, duffel bags heavy on her shoulders. "Anna," he called out. She froze, spinning toward him, eyes wide with alarm. For a moment, fear flickered across her face, the instinct of someone too familiar with danger. Jonathan raised his hands, palms open. "It's okay. I'm not here to cause trouble. My name is Jonathan Hale." Recognition did not come. She narrowed her eyes. "You're the man from the diner. What do you want?" Her voice was sharp, protective. She shifted subtly, placing herself between him and the basement door. "I know what you're doing here," he said quietly. "The Sparrow's Haven. I saw it the other night." Her jaw tightened. "You spied on me. I followed you." He admitted, shame stinging the words. "I was curious, suspicious. I was wrong. What you're doing, it's extraordinary. I want to help." From the pocket of his coat, he pulled an envelope. Inside lay a cashier's check for $100,000. He held it out to her. "This is for the Haven. Food, coats, medicine, whatever you need. You shouldn't have to carry this alone." Anna looked at the envelope as though it were a venomous snake. She didn't reach for it. "No," she said flatly. Jonathan blinked. "No, you don't understand. This could change everything. You wouldn't have to work yourself to exhaustion at the diner. You could. You're the one who doesn't understand." She cut him off, her voice gaining a sharp edge. Her eyes burned with a fire that startled him. "Do you think this is a business venture, something you can fix by throwing money at it? Money destroyed us once. I won't let it poison this place." Jonathan's hand trembled slightly as he lowered the envelope. "Destroyed you, how?" Anna's jaw tightened, her words spilling with controlled fury. "My family owned a small grocery store. 3 generations. It was our life, our pride. Then one day the landlord's debt was sold to some faceless investment firm. Overnight, they tripled the rent to make room for luxury condos. We lost everything. Our store, our home." Jonathan's stomach dropped. She stepped closer, eyes never leaving his. "They called it urban renewal. We called it ruin. They offered us a settlement check to disappear quietly. My father ripped it up in their lawyer's face. They crushed him anyway. And now you stand here with another check in your hand, thinking you can buy your way into our trust. I won't let your money poison what we've built." Her words cut deep. Jonathan's breath faltered. Because in that moment, with a cold rush of realization, he understood. That firm, the faceless predator, wasn't just anyone. It was one of his own subsidiaries, buried in the maze of portfolios and funds that made up his empire. Anna's rejection wasn't just principled, it was personal. And she saw him not as a savior, but as the embodiment of the very system that had destroyed her family. Jonathan stood in the rain, the check still heavy in his hand, but it felt worthless. For the first time in his life, money was not just useless, it was the problem.